Hi, my name is Kosiancic and I'm the owner of Studio Noir and creator of Studio Noir Academy. I'm a cosmetic tattoo artist specializing in lip tattooing and I'm based out of Kelowna, Canada. For this video, I wanted to talk about color theory and how I predict the healed results for my clients. Just a quick disclaimer, I know everyone perceives color a little differently and there are multiple ways that artists teach color theory. This is just how I understand it and how I choose pigments for my clients using the pigments that I have. Also, not everyone is the same, and when you are trying to predict the healed result, you want to focus on these main things: where they land on the Fitzpatrick scale, their melanin presence, their lip color, and their age. Knowing these things will help you adjust your technique and choose pigments based on their desired healed result. When predicting the healed result, you want to first look at what influences someone's lip color. This can include things like melanin content, undertone, age, smoking, and sun exposure. I'm going to start with the basics, and that's the Fitzpatrick scale. This is a scale that is from 1 to 6, and it determines how your skin reacts to UV light. If you're a Fitzpatrick 1, you will have very fair skin, red hair, and light eyes. If you're a Fitzpatrick 2, you again will be very fair with dirty blonde hair, light eyes. These people would most likely burn in the sun and have a cooler undertone. Anyone who is a Fitzpatrick 3 would have a more beige skin tone and have darker blonde or light brown hair, and they would have a more neutral undertone. As you can see, the higher you get on the Fitzpatrick scale, the darker your features will be, the less likely you'll burn when exposed to the sun, and you will most likely have a warmer undertone. Where you would land on the Fitzpatrick scale is influenced by your melanin content. Melanin is a pigment produced by your cells called melanocytes that are in the epidermis of the skin. They influence the color of your hair, skin, eyes, and other tissues in your body, such as your lips. They also protect us from UV rays. There are two types of melanin. There is eumelanin and pheomelanin. Both types of melanin are found in all skin types. Pheomelanin doesn't change in our skin over time. It is responsible for the red and yellow pigments that is prevalent in people who come from environments with less intense sunlight. These people will have lighter features and will be a Fitzpatrick 1 to 3. This type of melanin also contributes to the red and pinkish hues found in the lips. Anyone who is a Fitzpatrick 4 to 6 would have more eumelanin, which is responsible for the black and brown pigments. Eumelanin is always changing in the body. People from hotter climates, such as Africa, tend to have more eumelanin in their skin due to the protective role that eumelanin plays against the harmful effects of ultraviolet light. Because eumelanin is the more protective type of melanin and it changes, when you're doing dark lips neutralization, you need to take a more delicate approach. This can be hard as people with darker skin usually have a thicker lip skin, so implanting pigment may be a little bit more difficult. Because of this, if you overwork the skin and cause an excess amount of trauma, it can trigger a trauma response, and this can result in hyper or hypopigmentation. This is an example of hypo and hyperpigmentation that has been caused by lip tattooing. It's not abnormal for this to happen, and I have noticed people online panicking 4 days after they have done a dark lips neutralization procedure, but you need to wait the full 12 weeks for these to heal because they're not fully healed before that, and they can change drastically over time, and the hyper and hypopigmentation will most likely subside. Next, I want to show you what these different types of melanin look like when they're present in the lips. This is one of my clients, and you can see that she has more melanin, specifically eumelanin, in her skin and her lips. You can see that her lips are very dark and she has black, almost gray colors because of the high amounts of eumelanin in her lips. If you look at the center of the bottom of her lips, you can see it's pink and beige. This is because she has less eumelanin and more pheomelanin present. This is another client of mine. You can see her lips are lighter and they have a red overall color. This is because the pheomelanin present in her lips. The next thing that I want to talk about is lip undertone. This also influences the color of the lips. When we're discussing skin undertone and lip undertone, there is a slight difference. When we are talking about lip undertone, we are specifically referring to the underlying tones that are present in the lips. Lip undertones can be influenced by the undertone of your skin, but that's not always the case. For example, someone with cool tone skin can have warm tone lips, and someone with warm tone skin can have cool tone lips. So here's an example. This is another client of mine. She is a Fitzpatrick 3. Her ethnic background is Asian. She has yellow and gold present in her skin, and this is because of the presence of melanin. You can see that her skin has a more neutral undertone, and if you look at her lips, they are very pale and they have a purple and blue undertone in them. So just because someone's skin has a neutral undertone, their lips can have a completely different undertone, and this is really important to note when you're working with darker skin types. Even though their skin is predominantly warm, they can have cool lip undertones. And you need to pay close attention when correcting lips with neutralization, because it will help you pick the appropriate pigment and achieve the desired result. Here is another example of a client of mine. You can see her lips are quite pale. The less melanin that is present in the lips, the more pale they will be. There will also be cool undertones. As you can see, they have a bluish look. This client has a little melanin content, and again, her lips have a visible cool undertone. When looking at the undertones pertaining to those who land on a Fitzpatrick 1 and 2, sometimes 3, the cool hues that you are seeing are actually due to the blood vessels beneath the skin's surface. Blood vessels can give your lips a reddish, bluish, or purplish appearance depending on their visibility and level of oxygenation in the blood. Because Fitzpatrick 1 to 2 don't have a lot of melanin in their skin, the coolness that you are seeing is actually through the skin. Another reason that you can see coolness through someone's lips can be due to their age. When we age, the skin changes in structure and we lose collagen, and our lips actually get thinner. This can affect the color, as the lips will lose pigment and the skin will become thinner, showing that coolness even more. The structural differences between young and aged lip skin are notable, particularly considering the layers of the skin and impact on their appearance in response to cosmetic procedures like lip tattooing. Lip skin has 3 layers just like the skin on your face. However, lip skin has a thinner epidermis. This is our face skin here, and the first layer of the skin is the epidermis. In young skin, it is generally thicker and more resilient. The outer layer acts as a protective barrier against environmental factors such as UV radiation. In aging skin, the epidermis thins, reducing the ability to shield itself against external elements. This thinning can make the lip skin more vulnerable to damage and less effective in retaining moisture. The second layer is the dermis. In young skin, the dermis containing collagen and elastin fibers provides structural support to the skin. In young skin, the dermis is well hydrated, promoting elasticity and suppleness. In aging skin, collagen and elastin production decreases, leading to a loss of firmness and the development of wrinkles. The dermis in aged skin also becomes thinner, and it is less able to maintain its original volume and structure. The last layer is the subcutaneous tissue. You will never tattoo here, and it lies beneath the dermis. In young skin, it contributes to the plumpness and youthful look of the lips. Adipose tissue is the layer that provides volume. In aging skin, the subcutaneous thins with age, resulting in a reduction in volume in the lips. Similar to working on a canvas for painting, the lip acts as a canvas for tattoos. When dealing with lips that are not in their best condition, such as those affected by aging, the outcome isn't just influenced by natural aging process, it can be influenced by factors like prolonged sun exposure. Regardless of the artist's skill, these conditions can significantly affect the ultimate appearance of the tattoo, just as a less than optimal canvas can impact the final result when you're painting. The condition of the lips plays a crucial role in the outcome of the tattoo, and it is important that you are paying close attention to your client's lips so you can adjust your technique accordingly. When I'm working with mature lips, I don't implant as much pigment just because the lips are so much thinner and the lips retain pigment so much easier. I also use softer colors and dilute my pigments. So this is just something to keep in mind when you're looking at your clients. You want to take into account not only their age, but the condition of their lips. The next thing that I want to talk about is how to identify color. This is super important when you are trying to predict the healed results. Also, when you are picking pigments, when you're doing dark lips neutralization. I'm sure everyone has seen this chart by now. This is hue, saturation, and value. Hue refers to color in its purest form, like how you would see it in a rainbow. So red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. Red is a hue. So are blue and purple. Baby pink is not a hue, it's a tint of red. Dark purple is not a hue, it's a shade of purple. What also differentiates color is saturation, which refers to the intensity and vividness of a color. How highly saturated a color is, the more vivid it will be. The lower the saturation, the more gray it will look. The last thing that differentiates color is value, which refers to how light or dark a color is. The higher the value, the closer to white and lighter the color. The lower the value, the closer to black and darker the color. Here's an example. If you look at these two colors, one is lighter because it's closer to white, and one is darker because it's closer to black. So we're going to expand on this and talk about tints, tones, and shades. They refer to variations of a base hue. A tint is created when you add white to a pure hue. It lightens the hue and the color and reduces the intensity. So for example, if you were to add white to red, you create pink. The more white you add, the lighter and less saturated the color becomes. So as you can see, this color is red, and this color is very light and less saturated because it is a tint of red. A tone is produced by adding both black and white to a pure color. It alters the color's intensity and results in a more muted, subdued version. For example, you can see that this color has a more muted look to it and it's not as vivid. And you can see that it's quite ashy. This is because of the white and the black that is added. White and black creates gray. That's why this has a gray, dusty look to it. A shade is achieved by adding black to a color. It darkens the color. So here's an example. This is a shade, as you can see, that is darker and it's closer to black. So by adding different variations of dark and light to a color, we can change the saturation and the value. This is super important to know as it is going to help mix pigments for your clients. For instance, if a client expresses a preference for a particular pigment, but doesn't like how saturated and bright it is, having a solid understanding of color identification becomes crucial. Without this knowledge, modifying pigment can pose challenges. If you were to try to blend this pigment and this pigment together that share a similar saturation and value, the alteration would be minimal. But if you were to mix it with a lighter pigment that has a higher value, you would have a significant change in color. This allows for effective lighting and it will result in a less intense and vibrant outcome for your client. So the next thing you want to look at when you're trying to identify color is temperature. Take a look at this color wheel. You can see that if you cut it in half, you'll notice the contrast between warm and cool colors. Think of it as fire and ice to understand the feelings and the looks of these color groups. On the warm side, you have got yellow, orange, and red, giving off a fiery vibe. On the cool side, you have green, purples, and blues, giving a cooler and icier feel. Even though reds are a warmer color, there can be cool variations of red. This goes the same for cool colors. Purple, even though it's considered a cool color, there can be warm variations of purple depending how much red or blue is in that color. So this is an example. You can see in the middle that this is a pink color, and the more blue you add, the cooler the color becomes. And then on the other side, the more red you add, the warmer the color becomes. This is another example. You can see that both colors are also purple, but on one side you have cooler colors compared to the other side where there's warmer versions of this purple. You can also see in this picture that there are light and dark, warm and cool versions of this purple. So we're gonna take a look at these pigments for an example. If you look at these pigments, you can see that they are both red. They both have the same saturation and a similar value, but you can see that one is a warmer undertone as it is more red, and the other one is a cooler undertone because it has more blue. Here is another example. If you look at these two colors, they are both tints of red. They are both a light pink. And you can see that one is warmer because it has more red and one is cooler because it has more blue. Knowing temperature is also important when mixing colors. Let's say you mixed these two colors together. Because they're both warm, there won't be much of a shift. But if you were to mix these two colors together, one is warm and one is cool, so you'll see a greater difference. If you're having a hard time understanding whether your pigment is warm or a cool undertone, you can always swatch them. So how you would properly do a swatch, or how I do swatching, is I'll get a spoolie and I will dip it in water, and then I will put a little bit of the pigment onto the spoolie, and I usually dip it in water again just to get any excess off. And then you want to get a good quality paper. You don't just want like a typical, like a plain 8x11 paper that you would buy for your printer. You want something that's a little bit like thicker. And then you would just draw down. So now that we've talked about how to identify color, the next thing I want to discuss is pigment. Not all pigment brands are the same, and you'll have to adjust your technique when working with different brands. All lip tattoo brands will be either synthetic organic, mineral inorganic, or hybrid. I specifically only use synthetic organic or hybrid pigments, but I'm gonna talk about all three. Synthetic organic pigments are tattoo pigments, which is brands like world famous ink. That's these ones. These pigments have a smaller molecular size, making them more vibrant and concentrated and easier to implant into the skin. They also last longer. And because of this, depending on the client, you would have to adjust your technique so you won't end up with an undesirable result. The next is mineral inorganic pigments. These are created by using natural occurring minerals found within the earth. These minerals consist of iron oxide, titanium dioxide, and chromium oxide. Mineral pigments are normally glycerin-based, and since the molecules of the minerals are really large and cannot be broken down into fine dust like organic pigments can, they become a non-concentrated substance and therefore have a larger dispersion when they're implanted into the skin. This means that they are harder to implant and it takes a longer time to achieve the desired coverage. They also do not last in the skin as long. So the last kind of lip tattoo pigments that I want to mention is hybrid pigments. These are brands like Evenflow, Maricolors, and Tina Davies. Hybrid pigments are the newest types of pigment brands on the market, and they have a smaller molecular size, just like tattoo pigments. They last longer than mineral inorganic pigments, which I don't use, and they are more forgiving than tattoo pigments. If you're a new permanent makeup artist and you're not sure what pigments to use, and you're scared of using tattoo pigments, these ones are a good one to start with. The next important thing that you want to look at is what's in your pigments. And if you're not sure what's in them, I would suggest looking up the MSDS online. This will include the CI numbers. These numbers can also be found on most of your pigment bottles. The CI numbers correspond with the color index, and this is a standardized system used to identify the name and colors used in various industries, and this includes permanent makeup. It is an international classification system that provides a unique identifier for each color, which makes it easier for manufacturers and suppliers and artists to communicate about specific colors. So for example, if your pigment number is 77 and above, the pigment particle is inorganic. And if the CI number is 7, 6 and below, the pigment particle is organic. So if you take a look, an example, this is Maricolors, and it is Choco Mauve. She displays her CI numbers beautifully on the back. Other pigment bottles, it might be really small. You can see that there are numbers CI 77491. And if you were to look that up, it would correspond with Red 101, which is an inorganic pigment. And then if you were to look at CI77891. That's titanium dioxide, which is another inorganic pigment. And then there's numbers like CI1174. Because it starts with 11 and it's not 77, we can determine that that is an organic pigment, so that is a tattoo pigment. These numbers are arranged in order, so because red 101 is the first colorant listed, it signifies that this pigment is predominantly composed of red 101. The last pigment is pigment red 146. Because this is the last colorant listed, it signifies that that is the lesser amount in this pigment. So now that we've talked about what's in your pigment and how to find out what's in your pigment, I also want to bring up a misconception that comes with titanium dioxide. I see this come up a lot online, and I feel like artists are under the impression that they need to avoid pigments containing titanium dioxide, when this is not necessarily true. I believe that some people have seen some botched lips or some worst case scenarios, and they believe the fake knowledge that gets spread around, causing people to avoid TD altogether. This isn't necessarily true. I believe that when used correctly, TD can turn out beautifully. So I just want to show you these two examples. If you look at both of these, you can see the titanium left over in the skin, and it's almost given this like peachy tone, which can happen over time, especially in people with lighter skin. On someone with darker skin, that peachy tone that you are seeing is just the improper tattooing of a neutralizing pigment, and now it's really showing the titanium over time. So from both of these pictures, you can determine that the tattoo is done incorrectly, and instead of tattooing into the skin properly, they were probably applying more force than they should have. And when it comes to tattooing, depth and pressure are a different thing. Depth is how far you should be implanting the pigment, and pressure is how hard you should be tattooing your pigment, so the amount of force applied. And when tattooing these types of clients, especially ones that are a little bit more mature, because their lips don't have as much fullness and are thinner, applying too much force can result in a concentration of this pigment, which will fade undesirably over time, and it will leave trauma and all this overall white, blotchy, chalky look. So what happens when you see leftover titanium dioxide like this? It's because people may not be getting the saturation that they are wanting, or they don't know the type of skin that they are working on. So instead of letting the gun work for you, your needle and your gun are working for you. They actually apply more pressure with their hand into the skin, which is just causing more trauma, and it's just causing an oversaturation in the pigment, which is gonna heal poorly over time, and there will be that saturation of titanium dioxide. That's why you can see it in these photos. Over time, it'll still be there because it lasts longer in the skin and it doesn't heal as beautifully, especially in those with thinner and mature lips, and if you have overworked the skin. So this was actually a client of mine. She came in and she had gotten her lips done somewhere else, and it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and she was from Australia, and you can't physically see the scar tissue that she had, but she's in her 30s and she had really nice lips, but the scar tissue was super bad in these parts of her lips. You could feel it without even tattooing. It was so dense and her skin was so hard, and you can see the leftover titanium. So this is a really good example showing that even though that this client wasn't a mature client, this was a young client, this was clearly from improper technique, and this was someone who was inexperienced, and they were trying to use more pressure and force when tattooing, probably because they weren't achieving the saturation that they wanted, and it ended up with scarring and trauma to this client's lips, and she has leftover titanium as a result. So here's another example. You can really see the titanium dioxide that was left over on her bottom lip, specifically on her pores. And this is just because of improper technique, and obviously they tattooed the pigment improperly, because you should never tattoo on someone's face skin. Face skin and lip skin are different. They are different in thicknesses, and they heal differently and they look differently. It will almost look like a rash when it's healing and over time, and then it won't heal as beautifully and fade out, and you'll be left over with this titanium dioxide accentuating your pores. So here's another example. You can see that there is leftover titanium in this person's lips, as her lips are all white overall, which are giving them a very dead and dull look. This case is on someone with more melanin in their skin, and it's not as apparent as the other ones where you can see the peachy colors and the white showing through, but you can see how chalky and saturated the pigment is, and that is from the titanium and improper technique. So what we can determine by looking at all of these cases is that it's not the titanium dioxide by itself that is causing these worst case scenario lips, but it's in fact the technique, improper pigment selection, and probably the conditions of someone's skin before the tattoo was applied. So the last thing I want to talk about to wrap up the pigment part of this video is warm and cool pigments. The choice between warm and cool lip blushing pigments is an important decision, as it can significantly affect the final result and how it heals on the skin and how long the tattoo lasts. In my experience, warm pigments create a more natural looking appearance, and they mimic the look of healthy lips, and they fade out more natural and more gracefully over time. Cool pigments can look natural for certain people, but as they fade, they tend to have a more dull and dead appearance, especially over time. When it comes to cool pigments, I have noticed that there is a debate on whether you have to color correct when it comes to clients with pale lips and cool undertones. Firstly, let's just talk about the science behind this. In the case of Fitzpatrick skin types 1 to 2, where melanin is virtually absent in the lips, that perceived coolness is originating from the blood flowing beneath the skin surface, which I had mentioned before. So this implies that any existing coolness isn't necessarily real, but rather originating beneath the skin surface. Whatever you tattoo will not mix with the coolness, yielding unsatisfactory results, as our tattoo will essentially conceal that underlying coolness. It's essential to note that this doesn't mean that cool colors are universally ideal for lip tattooing. Instead, it underscores the fact that due to scientific principles, there's no requirement to correct this coolness in Fitzpatrick skin types 1 to 2. We can just simply proceed to apply the target color directly over top of the lips. With that being said, from my personal experience, when you tattoo cool colors on clients with cool undertones, that cool pigment will look cooler over time. And that client's cool undertone will start to pull through as the tattoo fades. By counteracting the coolness of the client's lips and the cool pigment with a warm or neutral pigment, you will yield a more natural result when the tattoo heals, and you'll actually help with the longevity of your client's lip tattoo. Now that we have talked about the Fitzpatrick scale, melanin, lip undertone, age, and pigment, I want to show you how I put all of these things together to help me choose pigments and the steps that I take to predict the healed results, specifically a natural healed result, as this is the most requested from my clients. So firstly, I want to talk about the hue, saturation, and value, also the temperature that makes up your client's lip color. This is super important when choosing your pigment and predicting the healed result. The lips are the base in which you're going to be adding pigment on, and it influences how it will look like once the pigment has actually healed. The same color will not look the same on everyone, which is important to note. And here's an example of this. So this is Bad Girl by Permablend, and I have tattooed it by itself on 3 different people. You can see that the first client had very pale lips with a bluish undertone, and when Bad Girl was applied to her lips, it healed close to what's in the bottle, a cool light pink. On the second client, and you can see that her lips are again quite pale. They don't have as much melanin, especially on her top lip, but her bottom lip has this reddish hue with neutral cool undertones. Because of this pigment healed on the lips, and it looks redder and more reddy pink when it's healed. So if you look at the third girl, her lips are quite different compared to the other two. She has a lot of natural lip color. They're quite saturated and very cool in color. And for that reason, you can note that Bad Girl healed quite differently and it pulled a way deeper pink once it was healed. So this is a good example showing how your client's lips plus the pigment equals the healed result. So now I'm gonna show you a couple more examples of how I would choose and mix pigments for my clients. So this is my first example. This was my client and he requested a result close to his natural color, but he wanted more definition. He has a Fitzpatrick 2 to 3. He is younger, so his skin is very hydrated and it's optimal to work on. You can also see that his lip color is a reddy pink with warm peachy undertones. We can also see the presence of melanin in his top lip. When you are trying to create a natural healed result, you want to look primarily at the center of your client's bottom lip. This is where you'll usually see the most natural color. Because he has a peachy pink in his bottom lip, I chose Melina by Evenflow as my target color. Melina is a peachy pink, and if I were to just tattoo Melina onto my client's lips, it would appear very bright and unnatural as Melina is fairly saturated. So what I did is create a base color by looking at the colors in his top lip, which are a more nudie pink. So I used Nude and Dusty Pink by Tina Davies and then added my target color Melina. By mixing all three colors together, I created an even natural color that matched his lips, and this is how it healed. You can see the color mixed with his natural lip color and undertone and yielded a super natural and even result that is a peachy pink color. Let's look at another example using just Melina. This is another client of mine. He is a Fitzpatrick 3. He has melanin present in his top and bottom lip, which are also lower in saturation and value. If you look closely, you can also see that he has a noticeable cool undertone. Because Melina is super saturated, it would have shown up really bright in the previous client because he had very light colored lips and they were pretty pale. This example, he has more saturation in his lip color, and because of this, his lips look also a little dull, and by just applying Melina, it turned out to a very beautiful peachy pink, which is what we were hoping for. If you have trouble mixing pigments for your clients and you're scared that it's gonna be too saturated, I always recommend diluting your pigment. This basically waters down the pigment so it's not as intense when healed. And how I would do that is I would mix 1 drop of diluter for every 5 drops of pigment. But if you have a really bright color, I would use 2 drops of diluter for every 5 drops of pigment. How I choose and mix my colors for people with lighter lip colors is completely different for how I mix them for people who have more melanin in their lips. When working with clients with more melanin, I work with complementary colors, which is a common practice in permanent makeup. Complementary colors are the opposite on the color wheel. You can see that orange is the opposite of blue and yellow is the opposite of purple. Browns are not on this color wheel, so I want to show you this color wheel specifically because it's going to help you see the different shades of black, brown, purple, grays, and blue and what colors are recommended to help neutralize these. So if you look over here, they have purple colors and then corresponding yellows to help neutralize these colors. Over here are more brown and the corresponding is pinks. When you have brown lips, it's gonna depend on the amount of melanin, so how dark those lips are to be able to use pinks. I don't typically recommend using just pink to neutralize brown lips depending on how dark they are. If they're pretty light, you can still get a very pretty healed result. And I would recommend something that's more saturated and orange to help neutralize darker lips, just because it'll help blanket that dark melanin and you'll get a very beautiful healed result. Here's another example. This is a client of mine. You can see that she have tones of black melanin in her top lip, and you can see her bottom lip is quite peachy, pink, or red. If you were to use just Melina, because it's warm and peachy, it might help neutralize some of the darkness in her lips, and it would blend really pretty with the bottom, but it wouldn't be saturated enough to give you enough of a light result when it's healed, and the dark would most likely still come through. So when you're neutralizing dark lips, you want to use something that's quite saturated and is light enough to lighten these dark areas. You want to use something like Bora Bora Peach. As you can see, this is a really bright saturated pigment, especially against Melina. This pigment would help neutralize these dark areas of her lips and at the same time blend in really beautifully with the bottom. If you were to just use Melina, again, these dark areas would show through and you wouldn't get an as even result as you would if you were to use a more brighter saturated color. So I hope this all made sense when it comes to picking pigments and predicting the healed result. You really want to take into account the client's undertone, their hue, saturation, value, and temperature of their lips, because this will make a difference on how the pigment will heal. Someone with pale lips who have a cool undertone will heal differently if you use a certain pigment compared to someone who has very saturated lips and a cool undertone. So looking at these factors will help you predict how the color will heal, especially when you're working with melanin-rich lips. You definitely want to look at their undertone, hue, saturation, value, and their temperature. How dark a person's lips are will definitely play a huge role in the color that you are choosing. If you are choosing colors that aren't bright and vivid enough to cover that darkness, it's just gonna show through and you won't be able to neutralize it properly. So just make sure that you guys are taking these things into account, especially all of the stuff that I previously talked about. You wanna look at their Fitzpatrick scale, their age, do they smoke, do they have sun damaged lips, is their skin thin, do they have a cool undertone? All of these things play a role when you're picking pigment for your client, so just keep this in mind. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something new. Lip tattooing is super hard and learning color theory is even harder, so just do your best. Lastly, if you don't follow me on Instagram, it's studionoir.ca. I do offer online and in-person training, and if you want more information, you can visit my website, which is also studionoir.ca. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video.